Now, tourism has been touted as one of the sectors that can reignite the South African economy. So what's going wrong? The number of visitors to the country is down compared to the same period last year, and that means, of course, fewer jobs. Some are blaming Cape Town's water crisis and the onerous visa requirements. But how do we get back on target to become one of the top 20 tourist destinations within the next 2 years? My name is Vuyo Mvoko, and this is our nightly look at South Africa under the Ramaphosa administration. This is As It Happens. My guest tonight on As It Happens is SA Tourism CEO Sisa Ntshona. Good evening, Mr. Ntshona. Thanks very much for coming through.
Yeah, thank you. Good evening.
So what's going on? Why is our tourism industry not performing as well as everyone seems to say or to think it has a potential of doing?
I think there's various factors, and we just need to look at these in two separate buckets, if I can call that one. So let's start off with the international tourism side. Globally, it's happening. It's really improving quite well. We've seen growth from our US markets, from our European markets. Even South America is growing quite well. Where we've seen a bit of pressure, in terms of the numbers not coming through the rate that we expect them, is from our SADC region, basically Zimbabwe, Mozambique, and even Lesotho. Big one was Zimbabwe. When you've got currency constraints, it actually limits the flow of people between the two countries, and we've seen some pressure in that regard. But however, the first quarter of this year, we've seen an upturn coming through, and we're encouraged by those results. Then to look on the domestic tourism side, there's a whole lot of factors around that side. I mean, you can't take away the very sluggish economy that we have. So essentially, the tourism sector is fighting for the share of wallet, alongside everything else. The constant fuel price increase is also putting a lot of pressure in it, because essentially tourism is about mobility. Mobility is about fuel, essentially. And these all seep down into the mainstream economy there.
Now, well, let's start. Let's look at the global situation for a while. You've lost visitors from the UK, for example. Presumably, those you already have, or that have been sort of boosting your numbers, that stuff you hold on to. Now, once you start losing there, what hope do you have of bringing more people from elsewhere?
Well, the UK market is outside of the continent, it's our biggest market in terms of source market. We're actually flat in the UK. So we did not lose, we did not gain. And the UK is actually going through its own economic issues. The Brexit is a big weight on that particular space. So we've seen the UK, when you look at those numbers, there's a lot of what we call intra-tourism happening. So people are not leaving the UK, but they're actually staying within the UK. We monitor as long as we're not losing market share to other sectors. So if we're all remaining flat, relatively speaking, we're kind of doing okay. But we're putting more attention in those markets to make sure that we've got ease of travel between South Africa and the UK, essentially.
Do you have that?
Yeah, we're getting there. We're certainly getting there.
What are the stumbling blocks?
Well, there's a couple of issues. We call them barriers, essentially. One of them is a clarity around unabridged certificates, especially for minors. So therefore, parents traveling with kids need a lot more documentation. They actually have to prove that the children are theirs in terms of certified documents. Now, for you and I, it's very easy to go to the police station and get something certified. However, in other markets, you can't go to the police station. You actually need a barrister to actually certify your documents. That could easily cost £500 per certification. So already putting up costs up front on that side. However, we've also seen some encouraging green shoots coming through. BA have just announced another route that they're putting through starting October, I think, between Heathrow and Durban, King Shark International. And that's going to add a bit more seats on board and therefore bring more people coming on board. So I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, but we're looking at across the board to make sure that we become specific in removing the barriers, but also enabling in other areas.
How are you doing on the other markets that had been growing nicely from what we are told, like China, for example?
Well, China is the world's largest source market. Everyone has a China strategy. Chinese travel in numbers and they spend. Just in 2017, 145 million international trips were undertaken by the Chinese. Unfortunately, we had a 17% year-on-year drop on China. And there's a couple of things.
That's huge, though.
It is huge. It's also quite concerning, and it's certainly something that we've elevated right across, even to the ministry from the perspective. I think key there as well is also part of the barriers, visas. Chinese need visas to travel to South Africa. In a population of over 1 billion people, you can imagine in terms of capacity that you need to have in order to process all these visas. So our efficiency in terms of processing all these visas was not as what it should be, and that you can start to see coming through in the numbers as well. Then lastly, connectivity.
Wait, let's just stay with that point for a short. Are you saying that South Africans or South Africa in China isn't able to process visas, or certainly not speedily or efficiently?
Yeah, I mean, for the numbers that we're targeting, you look at the capacity. So essentially, we've got 11 centers across China that actually collect visas. However, the processing hub, if I can call it that, only has 3 people in China. So 3 people are going through.
1, 2, 3.
Absolutely. Right?
People.
3 people.
Okay.
And all of them now are processing these visas. I'm not sure what the output is on a daily basis, but you can imagine the backlog that it has, and also, again, ease of travel. The issue here is not so much about visas, but it's about making them user-friendly, predictable, and consistent, so that you know that when you submit your documents, in 3 days or 4 days, you'll get an answer back, and etc. It's when, it's almost like goes into a black box and you don't know what's going on. That's when it kind of creates angst.
But I thought, China is part of BRICS. One would have thought that you give priority to those countries because you want to, facilitate investments. You want those people, to come here as often as they can. We're playing hosts.
Yeah.
Now. So, why then? Aren't there conversations where it matters to say, guys, we've got to deal with this situation? You're costing us. Yeah,
I think the conversations are happening across the board. You are very right, is that South Africa has the chairmanship of BRICS at the moment, and there exists an opportunity then to kind of say, well, how do we further entrench our relationships with BRICS? An example of a recent...
But this is not about even relationships.
Yep.
Here is an industry that everybody says has got a huge growth potential, while other sectors of the economy, are like contracting. Yeah. Here's a sector that has got enormous scope or potential to grow. So it shouldn't be a casual kind of conversation. This is not a nice to have.
Yeah. It's a coordination across all government ministries and all government departments. For tourism to work effectively, it's not just the Department of Tourism that makes it happen. We need safety and security coming on board. We need Home Affairs to come on board. We need Department of Transport that issues the licenses. So it's the entire ecosystem coming together to make sure that we can deliver on our mandate as tourism. Certainly our minister is really leading the charge and making sure that he talks to his counterparts essentially to do just that, to make sure that the barriers that are there are actually lifted and removed. This is also very clear from the President's first State of the Nation address. He talked about the importance of tourism, but he also said, well, in order for us to double the jobs that are there, we've got to remove the barriers. And I think that's something that's receiving a lot of attention and pressure at the moment.
But it doesn't sound like, I know the difficulty, people who run like these agencies like you have to, call a spade a spade. But the fact of the matter is, we're having a conversation a couple of weeks ago when we're talking about the NHI with the Minister of Health, where he admitted he has a huge problem, that we only have... These are the resources at his disposal, but the burden he has goes beyond what he can actually afford. But the conversations with Home Affairs, for example, the conversations with Treasury are not what they should be. So he sits there and hopelessly resigns to whatever it is that he gets given. But at the end of the day, he is the one who's going to be seen to have failed. The same goes for like local government. For example, the minister responsible for state enterprises wants ESCOM, to be, that utility that delivers what it is supposed to deliver as best as it can. But the fact of the matter is that given what is happening at municipalities, that is also not going to happen. So it doesn't seem or sound like these conversations are happening where it matters. But everybody who talks about their portfolio minister will say, my minister is actually doing the best that they can. But the reality is that we're not seeing the fruits of that.
Well, you're actually highlighting something that is probably endemic across the public sector government space. It's not unique to tourism. We need all the bits and pieces of government to work together, to align together in order to deliver on it. It is when, the area of control is beyond your immediate space. What can you do? You influence, you also alert the system to what we are leaving behind and the potential that is there. Working together is simply not negotiable, because when you've got the NDP, Vision 2030, tourism is a priority sector. And essentially what it means, it's supposed to bring everyone's eyes on it to say, well, what's my role and contribution? What do I need to lift out of it? And I think that's the space that we're in. It's also when there is no consequence management, So as long as I'm focusing vertically in my space and there's nothing that's going to be untoward on me, why should I? It is really bringing through these pieces. So, through the ministry, we are really elevating the status of tourism to actually saying we can go as far as we can. However, we need an enabling environment, and an environment that allows it in order to deliver the results that we want.
Okay. We're in conversation with Sisa Ntshona, the CEO of SA Tourism. When Newsnight continues.